We are Life Church Livonia.
So good. Listen, we are really excited that you are here this morning, as Alex said, and we have been really loving what God has been doing in this series that we are wrapping up today. And so this series is called Beloved. And it's a series that it came out of a time of prayer. It came out of Alex and I praying over this one question that is, God, what does our church need? What do the people that come through these doors desperately need to know? And so as we leaned into that and we prayed about that and we were asking God to show us kind of in Scripture, what is the core truth that for this season in the life of our church we need to deliver to the people, we landed here. It's a topic that is applicable to your life, whether you are young or old, male or female, whether you are single or married. Listen, it's true about you whether you are a new believer or whether you've been following Jesus since you can remember. Because what we're talking about is a question that all of us will ask at some point in our life. And the question is this: who am I? Who am I? It's a question that isn't defined simply by your name or by your family of origin or by your ethnicity or your culture. It's not something that you can discover in school or at your first job. The question of who am I is a question about the core of your identity. And you're wondering not just the true things about me, but what is the truest thing about me? And I believe that there's no question that you could ask that's more important than that one. And it's a question that we've been trying to answer over the last few weeks. There's an author and a pastor named David Lomas, and he talks about this topic in one of the books that he wrote. And this is what he says. He says, "We are a collection of contradictory someones defined by what we do, the things we have, and what we desire." And so as we pull this quote apart, we realize that there's a confusing kind of thing that's happening in our life, that there's a whole bunch of someones. When we ask the question, who am I? There's a whole bunch of someones that we could potentially be. And one day we find ourselves defined by what we do. Another day we find ourselves defined by what we have. Another day, entirely something different, we find ourselves defined by what we desire. And the truth is the things we do, the things we have, the things we desire, they are true things about us, but none of them are the truest thing about us. None of them get to the very central core of your identity and answer the question that you're longing to have answered, which was, who am I? So let's just talk about that for a few minutes. Let's look at those three things that could potentially define you. The first, starting with what you do. We're talking about your career. You're talking about maybe your status. Are you employed? Are you a stay-at-home parent? Are you retired? What do you do? It's the first question that most people ask when they're trying to get to know someone. Well, what do you do? And if we don't do something that we feel is worthy or something that's great, we stumble, well, I'm just a stay-at-home mom, or I'm just a mail carrier, or I'm just a teacher. And when we answer it that way, it shows that there's a lack of pride in what we do. There's a fear that someone will judge us based upon what we do, because we've decided that what we do defines us. And anyone who's ever been fired from a job or changed careers or been faced with a potential career change or retired, or their kids have moved out and they define themselves as a parent their whole life, what they do, and then their kids move away and they don't know what to do with themselves anymore. They don't know who they are. Anyone who's been in a situation like that can help you to understand how fleeting this is a marker and a primary definer of your core identity. What we do is something that's true about us, but it isn't the truest thing about us. So let's move to the next area. Maybe what we have can be something that identifies us. And I'm not just talking about our material possessions. Although that's a really slippery slope, that what we have can, in some cases, define us, and the pursuit of more and more and more can become something that is true about us. But we're also talking about not only our material possessions, but the things we have available to us. I have a body that functions pretty normally. I have my legs function, my arms function, my hands, my eyes kind of function. Although I don't have the best eyesight, I have talents and abilities and gifts that God has given to me. Those are all things that I have. But they are even more fleeting than what we do as a defining marker of our identity. About a little over 20 years ago, actually, one of my close friends in ministry was in a sledding accident. And I don't think I'll ever forget the day that I got this phone call saying that this friend of mine, this person I'd partnered in ministry with, that my wife had served under in his ministry in Colorado, was in a sledding accident, and he had broken his back and was paralyzed from the chest down. And for him, this was crushing. I remember talking to him, and he said that he would rather die than lose his legs. Because for him, he couldn't imagine who he was without something that he had previously had. Mobility from the waist down. The ability to run and jump and dance and play volleyball and do all of these things. He couldn't even imagine how could God use him in ministry as a youth pastor if he couldn't walk. It was something that he had, and something that unbeknownst to him, unbeknownst to even me or anyone else, had defined him. What we have is a fleeting, temporary thing to define your life around, to find your core identity in. When I was injured and could no longer be a gymnast, I wondered, who am I? If I'm not a gymnast, what am I? I spent 11 years of my life as a young man, from the age of 6 until I was 17, working out 5 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, and now suddenly I couldn't do it any longer. I had no idea who I was because something that I had was taken away from me. We can't define ourselves based on those things. But I think even more dangerous is if we begin to define ourselves and find our core identity in what we desire. There are a lot of things that you desire that are pure and holy and good and amazing. Things that we desire that honestly God put there. But there's also darkness within our desires. There's things that we don't talk about openly, things that we're ashamed to admit, things that capture us and control us, things that we're addicted to, things that we long for that we know are off. Think about how many people you know define themselves, label themselves based upon what they desire sexually. Think about the people that define themselves and label themselves based upon what they desire chemically, or when it comes to drugs or alcohol, any addiction that they have. When we define ourselves purely based on what we do or what we have or what we desire, we might be touching on things that have some truth to them, but they aren't the truest thing about who we are. And we've talked about this lots of times, that we believe in spiritual warfare. We believe that there is an enemy out there. His name is Satan. We believe that he will first try to convince you that lies are true. But if he can't convince you that a lie is true about you, he'll convince you that a subpar truth is the only truth about you. A subpar truth, meaning something that, yeah, it's true. And Satan wants you to think that's the only thing that's true about me. That's the only thing that defines me. And if he can get you to stop there and never push any deeper, you will miss out on the deepest truth about who God says you are. And that's what this entire series has been about. Because God looks at you and he says, you are my agapetos, my beloved. That is the truest thing about you. And if you've been with us over the last few weeks, you know that agapetos comes from a passage in Matthew chapter 3 when Jesus comes up out of the waters of his baptism and the Holy Spirit descends and speaks and says, this is my beloved child, my beloved son, my agapetos, in whom I am well pleased. And then throughout the rest of the New Testament, we, God's people, are defined by this same word, that we are his beloved, his agapetos. And that, my friends, I believe is the truest thing about you. It is true about you regardless of what you do, what you have, or what you desire. And learning to settle into that truth about yourself is the most important journey that you will ever take. It starts when you realize that God chose you, that he sees you, he longs to have a relationship with you. It grows as you then in return choose God and learn to sit under the blessing that he wants to shower over you, pour out on you. And it's refined when we wrestle with our brokenness. Our brokenness is a critical part of figuring out who we are because it helps identifies the chinks in our armor. It tears us down and God builds us back up. But today we want to take it a step further. Today we want to move on to the next step in becoming the beloved. Because friends, we are chosen, we are blessed, and we are broken so that we might be given. We are chosen, we are blessed, we are broken so that we might be given. The life of an individual who has discovered their core identity as the beloved child of God will never flourish until it's given away. Your life as a beloved will not reach its fullest measure, its place of being complete until you learn to model your life after the love of God, until we learn to model our life after the way that Jesus lived his life. He was all of these things, chosen, blessed, broken, absolutely no one more broken than Jesus on our behalf. But he came so that he might be given. And God says, I want you to model your life after him. 1 John chapter 4 says, Beloved, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin. Beloved, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us and his love is made complete in us. No one has ever seen God, but when we are chosen and we are blessed and we are broken and then we choose to give ourselves in love to the people around us, people see God in us. No one has ever seen God, but they see us. They experience us. They see God through us and in us. And as we learn to give ourselves, his love is made complete in us. I believe that the greatest fulfillment you will ever find in your life comes as you center yourself in the truest thing about you. As you center yourself on this truth that you are the beloved child of God, and then you love people out of that place of centeredness. You love people out of that place of the truest thing about you. Your life is made complete when you learn to give it away. Your life is made complete when you learn to give it away. And this is about as countercultural of a statement as we will ever make from this stage. Most people in our world and in our culture would not believe that this is true. That our life is made complete when we learn to give it away. In fact, most people would say that the opposite is true, that your life is complete when you figure out what you want to do. Or your life is complete when you attain what it is that you want to have. Or your life is complete when the deepest desires of your heart are satisfied. But the problem is, even those people, they begin to question whether that is true because their job, the career that they attain begins to lose its luster and lose its shine and begin to be depressed. Or they attain all the things that they want to have and yet they still feel like something is missing. Or they seek out after and they grab hold of the deepest desire of their heart and they still feel empty. That even though this statement that you become complete when you learn to give yourself away is countercultural, I believe that most people in our culture would realize that if they stopped and they listened and they stopped and they looked and they stopped and examined their life, they would realize that there's so much more that they are missing. And so not only is this countercultural, not only is it hard to grasp, it's not modeled by very many people around us. So many of us have never seen what this actually looks like. We haven't seen what it looks like to be around a person who gives himself away out of a centered place on the love of God. And either we haven't ever seen it modeled or all we can see are the barriers between us and doing that. I just want to address a few of those barriers. I want to talk about what is preventing us from taking that leap of faith, from learning to give ourselves away in love. And the first barrier is this, is that we try to give God's love away before we have learned to receive that love for ourselves. This has been what this entire series has been about. So I'm not going to camp here for a really long time. The passage that we just read tells us that first, God loves us. It says, this is love. Not that we loved God, but that God loved us. That's the essential truth that we have to come to grips with. And so it becomes a barrier to us giving ourselves away, to giving the love of God away, if we've never actually learned to receive that love. And so if you are struggling or wrestling with that or want to learn how to do that, I encourage you, go back and listen to the first few weeks of this series. Listen to week 1 through 4, because we're talking about how do you learn to become the beloved in all of those sermons. So I'm just going to leave it there. Check the sermons out. But it leads us to our second barrier, and it's this, is that we've received the love of God, but we still don't believe, we still don't think that we have anything worth giving. You're like, Brian, I would love to step into this truth. I would love to learn to give myself away. I would love to learn to give back to God and show God's love, but I don't think I have anything worth giving. Or we come to this place where we believe that we have something to give, but what we have to give doesn't really matter. Well, we have something to give, but we don't have nearly as much to give as the person that sits on the other end of the aisle. We have something to give, but when I served in Life Kids, I felt like other people were better at it than me, and so I stepped out. I have something to give, but I'm a little bit more introverted than the people that stand at the door, so I'm just going to not do anything. Well, I have something to give, but what I have to give isn't nearly as valuable as what they have to give. We don't think that what we have is worth giving, and it becomes a barrier to us stepping out and giving ourselves fully to God and giving ourselves fully to people. This is so common, and it comes from a misunderstanding of your very identity. If you are reduced to what you do, what you have, or what you desire, there will always be a deficiency. And if we are reduced to what we do or what we have or what we desire, then sometimes you may be right. If that's all you have to give, then sometimes you may be right that what you have to give isn't worth giving. But that's not the only truth about you. That's not the only part of who you are. The life of the beloved is so much more than that. So my friends, don't get caught up in this space. Don't get caught up in the trap of comparing yourself to others or looking at the giftedness or the talent of others. Don't get caught up in this trap of reducing yourself to simply what you do or what you have. Don't get caught up in this trap where there's a barrier that prevents you from living fully into the life that God calls you to live. Don't get stuck focusing only on your talents and your abilities. Henry Nouwen, who is a writer that has really shaped what we've been preaching about over the last few weeks, was a pastor and a servant of God who learned this deeply. And he would tell you that the place that he learned more about giving yourself away, more about what it looked like to just be a child of God, was in the years he spent serving at a home for people with mental and physical disabilities. His job was to be the pastor for these individuals who the world would say didn't have anything worth giving. His whole job was serving these people that some of them couldn't speak, some of them couldn't walk, some of them would never have been able to read or contribute in a way that the world would say is valuable, and yet he would say they gave him more than anyone he had ever met before in his life. This is what he says about it. He says, when focusing on our talents, we tend to forget that our real gift is not so much what we can do, but who we are. The real question is not, what can we offer each other? But the question is this, who can we be for each other? And he goes on in some of his writings to talk about individuals who never spoke a word that made him feel more loved than anyone else in his entire life. He talks about people that could never get up and walk around, who were not just paralyzed from the waist down like my friend, but completely paralyzed from the neck down, who were able to love on him and care for him more than anybody who had full mobility ever had. He says, when we focus on our talents, we tend to forget that our real gift is not in what we can do, but in who we are. And who you are is that you are the beloved child of God. The greatest thing that you can give away is the real you. The real you. Your own sense of identity rooted in God's love, established in who he says you are. Your sense of centeredness on the peace and the love and the grace and the mercy of God. Your presence in someone else's life. Giving to them out of your core identity. Loving people out of that centeredness that God has led you to. This whole series is connected deeply with what we're going to talk about next. Starting next week, we're going to begin a new series called Love Where You Live. And it's all about really answering this question and learning how to live out the answer to this question that Henry was asking. The question is this: who can we be for each other? How can I just learn to love where I live? Love people right where I am at today. Not loving people based upon my talents or my gifts or my abilities. Just saying, how can I be God's love right here wherever I find myself? What does it look like to live a sent life that is rooted and centered on the love of God? And if you find yourself in this place today, if you find yourself in a spot where you're feeling like what you have to give isn't worth giving, what I want you to know is this, is that when you have God, you always have something worth giving. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've done. I don't care how broken you've been or how broken you are now. When you have God, you always have something worth giving, which leads us to the third barrier. And the third barrier is this, is that we don't think there's enough of us to go around. So we experience the love of God and we overcome that first barrier and we begin to realize that we actually do have something to give. And so we overcome the second barrier, but then we come to this. And we're like, well, yeah, I have something to give, but there's just not enough of me to go around. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough resources. I think that almost everyone in this room has thought this at some point. That I just don't have enough. Or I'm doing enough. We look at our schedule, we compare our lives to the other people around us, we think about how overwhelmed we are with the things we're already doing, and we think, I just can't do anymore. Or we think what I'm doing is enough. And in so doing, we limit our ability or our willingness to step fully out and give ourselves away. Now, this isn't me saying that you shouldn't have boundaries. That's a whole nother sermon series. We could talk for weeks about setting up good boundaries. And I find often that the people who struggle with boundaries, the people that give, are also people that have never learned to receive. That's why it's step one. The only way that you can overcome this barrier of thinking that we don't have enough to go around is if you learn to receive first. But it's a huge barrier. We think there's just not enough of me. And there's a story in the book of 2 Kings in the Old Testament that I think it highlights the false nature of this statement. It highlights for us that this is a lie. If we've come to believe that there's not enough of us to go around, it's a lie. We've come to believe, and this story in 2 Kings, I think, highlights that really well. 2 Kings chapter 4 says this. A man came from Baal Shalishah, bringing the man of God 20 loaves of barley bread baked from the first ripe grain, along with some heads of new grain. Give it to the people to eat, Elisha said. So stop right there. Ready? I want you to imagine this is Elisha. He's a prophet. He's a big deal. And this man comes to him bringing him a gift. 20 loaves of baked bread. This would have been a great gift. If Elisha was anything like me, I would be like, heck yeah, brother. I love some fresh baked bread. You can't. My love language is food, friends, okay? And what does Elisha say to him? He says, give it to the people to eat. He doesn't receive it. He says, give it away. And the guy says this, verse 43, how can I set this before 100 men? His servant asked. But Elisha answered, give it to the people to eat, for this is what the Lord says. They will eat and have some left over. And then he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Lord. A couple of things I want you to know about this story. That there was an incredible famine happening in the midst of this. That God had caused a famine to come as a result of the lives of the people, of his people, of his chosen ones. And they were suffering as a result of this famine. And so a man bringing Elisha an offering of food of 20 barley loaves in the midst of a famine would have been a really big deal. This would have been sacrificial giving. This would have been this man thinking, this is all I have to give. And he probably would have brought it thinking, man, I really succeeded here. This is a result of my hard work, my hard labor. This is a result of my ability to cause my crop to flourish when everyone else's is dying. That I just brought an amazing gift. And then what does Elisha say? He says, I want you to give it to all these people that are here. And the guy's like, there's over 100 men here. And immediately he's thinking to himself, there isn't enough to go around. I'm giving as much as I can, and this is what I have to give. The most I can give won't be enough. And we get stuck in that same mentality. But it's not about barley loaves or food. It's about our lives. Where we get stuck here and we think, there's not enough for me to go around. There's not enough of me to go around. I don't have anything else left to give. I am tapped out. I am maxed out. I am at my limits. And this servant who comes to Elisha is just like you and me. Wondering, how is what I have to give going to be enough? And Elisha says, I want you to give it to the people and believe that God will make it enough. What we begin to realize is that we follow a God who multiplies what we offer him. We serve a God who calls us his beloved and promises that he will be with us every step of our journey, and he will be with us in the midst of everything that we have to offer. That we follow a God who created this incredible system in which the more you give yourself away, the more he gives back to you. And I want you to be clear here. It's not about giving of yourself so that you can get more from God. That's like playing games with God, and I want to encourage you not to play games with God. That is not safe for you. It's not about giving just so you can receive. It's giving because it's the right thing to do. It's giving because that's who God made you to be. It's giving because that's what allows you to be complete. It's giving because that's how we model our lives after the life of Jesus. It's about giving yourself away as an act of trust in your status as the beloved. We give ourselves away because we're saying, God, I trust you. I trust that you chose me, that you blessed me, that you broke me for a reason and then built me back up. And so now I'm going to choose to trust you by giving my life away. It's about living out what we say we believe about ourselves and about our God. And it's an act of remembering. It's an act of remembering who our God is. It's about remembering that it isn't about what we do or what we have or what we desire. It's about who we can be for each other out of our centeredness, out of this truth that God has been speaking over us over the last few weeks and will be speaking over you for the rest of your life, that you are my agapetos, my beloved. It's about trusting that that is the truest thing about yourself. But I want to just be real about something. The first thing that I want to be real about is that I struggle with this too. There have been lots of seasons in the life of our church where I felt like I wasn't enough, where I felt like the demands on me. I said to the lead team a few months ago that I had come to realize that my quiet time with Jesus was really good, but it wasn't enough for this season. Because what I realized is that I needed to receive as much as I was giving. I needed to spend the time with God so that I could give. And there were times when I thought, I'm just not enough, and so I didn't give at all. Or there were times when I thought, well, what I have to give isn't worth giving, and so I didn't give it at all. And there were times in the last year of our church where I honestly began to believe some of these lies. This isn't easy because we have to stay rooted. We have to stay centered. And it's also not easy because as much as I tell you that it's true, as much as that I've experienced that this is true, that until you actually put it into practice, you won't come to know that it's true. I want to go back to the final verse from 2 Kings that we read. It says this, "Then he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Lord." Think about what this guy did. He brings his 20 loaves, his barley loaves come from the best part of his harvest. The first fruits, they called that. It was the very most important thing that they could have offered. It was typically an offering that he would give over to God. And in this case, he's bringing it to Elisha. He brings it to him and he's super excited. And he's probably expecting that Elisha will gush with gratitude, right? He's probably expecting that Elisha's like, thank you so much. I'm so hungry. And he would just dig in and dive in. But instead, there was a potential for him to feel rejected. When Elisha says, I don't want it, give it to the men. He could have taken his barley loaves and gone home. He could have taken his offering and gone home. He could have taken his extension of his love for God and gone home, thinking the whole way home that what he had given wasn't worth giving. He could have gone home and thought, well, he rejected it and he told me to give it to someone else, so it must not be something he values. And he could have extrapolated that out and begun to believe that he wasn't valued, that Elisha didn't value him, but he didn't do that. He could have walked away with his bread and abandoned this call to give it to the people because he had believed with everything in him that what he had to offer wasn't enough, that he didn't have enough to go around. And he could have turned around and walked away, and he would have missed out on one of the most incredible opportunities for growth that he had ever experienced in his life. Could have missed out an opportunity to give himself away, to give what he had away as an act of trust as his status as the beloved. Because friends, when we finally step out in this place and we learn to give ourselves away to other people around us as an act of trust in our status as the beloved, we actually allow God to prove his love back to us. Because listen to what happened. Then he set it before them and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Lord. What happened is this man stepped out in faith and God responded. This man stepped out in faith and God said, I see you. I see you. I see you. And I add myself to you, and it will always be enough. Because when we have God, we always not only have something worth giving, but we have enough to give. Because our God meets us in that space, and he multiplies our offering. When we live out the truth of our status as a beloved child of God, there will always be leftovers. I love that. Because it's the truest thing about you. Friends, I want to speak to you this morning straight from the words of Elisha. When Elisha comes and he says, take what it is that you have been given. Take what it is that you're about to offer and trust me. Give it. Step past this barrier of wondering whether it's worth it. Step past this barrier of whether or not you have a talent that's valuable enough. Step past this barrier where you just don't feel like you have enough time or energy or resources. Step past it all and give your life over to the people around you. And I promise you, it will not only be enough, but there will be leftovers. In the coming weeks and months as a church, we are really leaning into a new season as we prepare to make a move and go back to Holmes Middle School, as God continues to do amazing things in our midst, as people have come regularly and committed their lives to follow Christ. Just in the last few months, we've had a number of brand new people who've come into our midst, found a relationship with God, and been drawn into this life of being the beloved. And if we're going to fully live into who God called us to be as a church, it's going to require us to have a church that chooses to step out in faith and give themselves. Give themselves in service. Give themselves out of the centeredness that they have and their status as the beloved child of God. Would you join me on that journey? I'm there, and I invite you to go there with me. And I love that today we get to come to this table. The beautiful thing about Jesus, one amongst the million beautiful things about Jesus, is that Jesus doesn't ask us to do something that he hasn't done himself. We're following in the footsteps of our Lord when we live this out. That he was chosen, he was blessed, he was broken, and he gave himself away all the way. And that's what the communion table is all about. It's an act of remembering who he is. When he says to his disciples as he gathered for a meal, the night that he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. He said, "This is my body broken for you." He said, "I'm about to give everything I have for you." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup. He said, "This cup, it represents my blood, and it's a sign, a covenant, a promise. And as often as you eat the bread and you drink the cup, you proclaim who I am until I come again." This table is a feast. It's an act of remembering, it's an act of worship, it's an act of experiencing who God is, and it's a call to live in the same manner. It's a call to give ourselves away as well and to find that we are made complete when we do so. This table is for all who follow Jesus. And if you are in a place where you feel like you're far from God, I want to pray with you in a moment and give you an opportunity. Maybe this will be your first communion. We welcome you. In a few moments after we pray, we're going to invite you to come forward. Alex will be on this aisle and I'll be here, and we're going to have a little basket full of crackers. They're gluten-free so everyone can participate. We'll have a little cup of juice, and you can take and you can eat and you can drink, and you can remember that Jesus showed us the way. Jesus showed us what it was like to give ourselves and to be made complete in that process. Would you pray with me? Jesus, I'm convinced that there are people here today who haven't stepped past that first barrier. They haven't stepped past that first barrier of learning what it looks like to receive your love. And so if that's you and you're sitting here today, I just invite you in the quiet of your own heart, just sitting where you are in this space, just to open your hands. Say, "Jesus, I receive you. I receive your love in such a way that it covers over all of my brokenness. I receive your grace in a way that it purifies me from all of my sin. I receive your love today, God, as a beginning point of understanding the core truth about who I am. God, I choose you." And for others, God, who are sitting here, there's people that chose you a long time ago, that have been following you for many years and in some cases, God, but they haven't ever learned to give out of a place of centeredness. And if that's you, I just encourage you right now to make a commitment to God. To say, "Here I am, God. Wondering if I'm enough. Wondering if what I have is worth giving. Wondering if I have the time or the energy or the resources. And here I am, God, right in this space, remembering that when I have you, I always have something worth giving. That when I have you, there will always not only be enough, but there will be leftovers. Center me on you, God. Center me on your grace, on your truth, on your love. Help me to see the truest thing about me is that I am your agapetos, your beloved. I pray these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who showed us the way.